sales. Before Jerry covers the sales side, I'm going to cover with you guys just how the rebate program works. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here and give you guys a rundown of the new product. So, as most of you are or aren't aware of, there is 2 grafts at Revigen. We have our Amni Armor graft, which you guys have all been selling for a while. That's on the ASP file. And then the new graft is ReviShield Plus. So we're going to cover ReviShield Plus and how that graft gets paid for in the marketplace today. I'm going to try and make it quick. And then Jerry's going to launch into just kind of the sales strategy. So ReviShield Plus is the new dual layer amnion. So very similar to the Amni Armor that you guys are familiar with. The numbers are a little bit different now. So we have a new Q code. It's Q4289 on the brochure, and it's $1,850 a centimeter. And so the way that we've chosen to launch this program or this product into the market is use a rebate. We'd like to keep the ASP higher for longer. So there's just some nuances to understand how a true rebate program works and how you need to sell it and what you can and cannot do. That's very important. And we will not, we're not messing around on that. So I can't reiterate to you guys enough. If you don't understand the program, you can't sell the product. So, but it's not that complicated. So a true rebate program, so the guys are going to pay, the doctors are going to pay the full price of the product, and we're going to rebate them back. So hold on, Mike, I gotta find I'm on Mike's computer, sorry guys. So in your Dropbox, there's distributor documents that you guys have. This is like your sales material, and this is the contractual stuff in the physician documents that the physicians need to sign to become customers. So we did do a graphic for you guys, if everybody can see this, on how the rebate works. They have 2 options. They can get their rebate within 30 days of the start of a new quarter, or they can wait 2 quarters and they can get 40% rebate. So how that works is whatever they pay for in quarter 1, so quarter 1, and it's calendar quarters, very simple. January, February, March is quarter 1. Any invoices paid to Revigen in that quarter, they will get their rebate within 35 days of the next quarter. If they chose option 2 and they wanted 40% back, then they would get that money back in the first 30 days of 2 quarters later. So I think, and Jerry can speak to this more, I think the majority, maybe 80% or more, at least in our experience, all are putting these grafts on patients that are 100% covered, meaning they have Medicare Part B and they have a secondary insurance. So if that's the case, the doctors make a profit margin on Medicare pays invoice plus a margin. It's typically 6%. So 6% of $1,850 is $111 per square centimeter. So most of your customers are, even though they're paying full price for the graft to Revigen, they're still making a decent margin on the product for those patients that have a secondary. It's a different conversation if the patient does not have a secondary. They're only going to get reimbursed 80% of the $1,850 plus their 6% margin. So the way that we're going to teach you guys to do that in those cases is just have them pay their invoices at the end of the quarter, so they're only waiting less than 30 days to get their rebate back. And the doctors can, as an overall program, they're still going to do very well, but if they want to treat some 80% patients that only have 80% coverage, there's going to be a little bit of cash flow strain on your customer for a short period of time. But if they pay that bill at the end of the quarter, they get their rebate back. They can use part of their rebate to complete paying their invoices. and they still have this excellent profit margin. So it behooves you guys, and it's very important that you understand the two options. And coach your customers to pay their bills towards the end of the quarter, so that their cash is not gone for very long. Any questions about that? I want to cover just maybe 2 more minutes of a couple other documents for you guys, but I want to make sure that
see if we got people
everybody understands what we're talking about here.
Important to know too that guys, I'll throw this out there as well. It's important to know too that 30% at our 1850 graft is still probably significantly higher than 40 or maybe even 50% of a lot of the other grafts that are on the market. So don't shy away from the fact that we were offering 40% on amnio armor, and they have the option of 30% earlier or 40% later.
Right. So for the majority of your customers, we believe, and this is what we believe as a company, and what our lawyers believe, is that the rebate is safer than doing an on-invoice discount if it's not on ASP. So an ASP graft, it doesn't matter, but as you guys are aware, ASP grafts just get knocked, the pricing on the ASP grafts get knocked down quarter by quarter by quarter. So you're just chasing a sliding scale down to zero. And it's great. It's fine. There's still plenty of great stuff in there for you guys to sell. But when you're launching a new graft and it doesn't have established ASP like this graft does not have, we're not going to be able to use this graft on the West Coast, but everywhere outside of Novitas or Meridian, we will. So we have an ASP graft for Meridian that's at 637 a centimeter. But understanding that rebate, the two options, how to coach them through that is key. And you can use your Dropbox. We built the graphics so that the doctors can understand. Here's what you pay in this quarter. You receive your rebate back by this date. We gave ourselves 35 days, but really, in practicality, we hope to have these out in the first 21 days of the new quarter, but we gave ourselves a little bit of leeway there. And once you're walking the customer through this, and if you have a good grasp on how Medicare pays these guys, you'll see they're still not paying us until they're paid. So there's plenty of time. There's 60 to 90 days for them to pay us. They get paid for Medicare typically in 30 and sometimes 45. So they collect their money and then they pay us. They still make a margin up front, and then they make the rebate, within 30 days of the next quarter for what they've paid for. So that's just the most important thing to note. Jerry, if you have anything to add to that. Yeah.
Hey, I'm sorry. This is Albert, Florida.
Yeah. Hi, Albert.
Quick question. So in relation to, I'm sorry, I jumped on like 2 or 3 minutes late, so I apologize for that. But I didn't catch your first name.
Tim. My name is Tim. Albert.
Tim. Oh, yeah. Hey, Tim. Great to put a face with the name. I've seen it for sure.
Yeah.
So in relation to the doctor paying his or her bills, it's irregardless of whether they only have the Medicare Part B and or Medicare Part B plus a secondary. It's got nothing to do with that. It's just simply got to do with when they get paid from Medicare, that they pay us. Is that?
Yeah. Well, these are contractual agreements. So our contract says 60 days. They have 60 days to pay. Okay. But in practicality, that cash flow and all that stuff with all these businesses goes all around the it varies dramatically. Okay. But if let's walk through the quarter. So it's April, May, June is this quarter, right? We're in Q2 of 2024.
Correct.
So grafts that they apply in April, they're going to get reimbursed for in May. Grafts they apply in May, they're going to get reimbursed for in June. Okay. So grafts they apply in June, they're going to get invoiced for all those grafts at the end of the month, but the June grafts they haven't been paid for. So the customers are only going to pay for their April and May grafts at the end of June. And those are the only grafts that are going to be eligible for a rebate at the beginning of July.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay.
It's very simple, you guys, but
Got
it's very, very, very important that
To have it correct.
you're sticking to the script, because we're not going to do one-offs. We're not going to do favors. We're not going to do, it's not like your paperwork has to be completed. You have to have an onboarding form for every customer. You have to have a rebate agreement for every customer. This is not only to protect us, but it's to protect your customers. So you got to fill out the paperwork. You got to pick the rebate option, and you got to either get them in touch with me or Albert or Quentin or Mike if they have any questions on the rebate program, and they have to use our IBR service. So those are the things. If you're following those rules, you're going to be very successful. This is one of the best products on the market from a lot of standpoints, clinically, and this rebate program is one of the better programs that these customers can engage with to treat their patients. So you guys have the premium, one of the most premium offerings on the market that you get to sell. But we just have to do it right. We have to follow the rules.
I'm gonna get into this as well.
Okay.
Tim has not seen, what I'm gonna be showing you guys, but throughout my presentation, I'm gonna reiterate those points that Tim just made time and time and time again. The regulatory and compliance
100%.
arm of wound care is very, very different.
No, one
So,
second, Glenn. Do you know if Dr. Anderson heard back from Sky, or have you been in there yet?
No, I don't think she has. I haven't been in there yet. I was there this morning.
No problem. All right, I'm gonna run up there as soon as I'm done on this call.
Okay.
I'll see you.
Can you guys mute? Go ahead, Jerry. Keep going.
yeah, no, I mean, do you have anything else to say, or do you want me to just kind of?
No, I don't. No, I yield the floor to you, buddy. Go take after it. And I'm recording it too, so that the guys that are missing the call can hop on. But
Awesome. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen.
yeah, let me turn my stop sharing mine. There you go.
All right. Yeah, so Tim, thanks for the introduction. Tim, Albert, Mike, it's great to be doing this with you guys. For everybody on this call, what Tim, Albert, and the entire Revigen crew are doing is something that's amazing. I think it's absolutely awesome. I'm very excited to watch you guys grow as a sales organization. Excited to watch Revigen grow, as you guys advance into the wound care space. So just to give you guys a real quick background of who I am, where I come from, all that stuff. My name is Jerry Pascucci. I moved down to San Antonio, Texas about 2 years ago, native to Pennsylvania. My journey into medical device actually started going to medical school. So back in 2017, I was headed to the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and was very blessed at the time to be working for an orthopedic surgeon that kind of pointed me in the direction of med sales. So I started in DME and bracing, grew a territory from 88,000 in annual business to 1.88 million. Did that in about 10 and a half months. I was kind of just missing the operating room, right? I was missing scrubbing in, missing the OR presence, right? So from there, I've spent a variety of time with Globus Medical, Stryker, SI Bone, Arthrex, all within trauma and biologic space. Done everything from sales representation to sales management, research and development with one of the companies. And back in August of 2022, I got introduced to the wound care space. I had a customer that I was working with at Arthrex at the time approach me about finding him amnion for in-clinic wound care. Knew nothing about the space, but my experience in DME kind of allowed me to quickly pick up on what we were doing. And since then, I mean, it's kind of just exploded. To Tim's point, I run a very, very, very large sales organization, predominantly in the wound care space. About 75% of all the business that we do is in the wound care space. We've treated more than 7,000 patients in the last 2 years. So yeah, I'm excited to be talking with you guys today. So I am going to be giving this talk like you guys have never spoken wound care before. So we're going to take it from the basics all the way up. I would much prefer this be an interactive conversation with all of you guys. That's ultimately how you guys are going to get the most out of this, right? With kind of going back and forth with me, and let's just have open dialogue. So if you have any questions at any point, stop me. You can put them in the chat, etc., whatever you guys want to do. So what we're talking about, wound care. This is a chronic, non-healing wound, just proximal to the sternal notch. It's open. Okay, so we're talking about muscle fascial layer here, just inferior to what you're seeing here is the actual sternum. Right, but these are some very common wounds that you're going to see in a variety of different stages. All right, so we got a venous leg ulcer over here. We have a very bad oncological skin lesion here. Got a diabetic ulcer here and another venous leg ulcer here. The number one thing that I think makes wound care sales difficult for the medical device rep that's never had experience in wound care is that it is a very, very, very different sales cycle. It is a very, very different product line. It's a very different, it's a completely different call point. It's a different sell. And that starts, like Tim was mentioning, right, from compliance and regulatory affairs all the way through the actual patient level care. Everything is different than traditional medical sales. Okay, so you cannot take this one size fits all med device approach of I'm going to ram this sale down everyone's throats. I'm going to go off label with my IFUs, et cetera, et cetera. We really have to be dialed in with how you guys are marketing your program, with how you're marketing the product, with how you're speaking to your customers, and how all of that relates, right, to Medicare. So at the end of the day, this is a Medicare B driven program. As such, we have to follow the federal laws and regulations put in place. If we don't, Revigen's going to go up in flames, and every rep that misspeaks on its behalf will additionally follow suit. So it's very, very important that you guys are staying true with compliance, regulatory, and everything that Revigen is kind of directing you from a day-to-day sales. So let's just go ahead. You have a question? Okay, cool. So let's just get started. IFUs are very, very important. If you don't know what an IFU is, it's an indication for use. Okay, so they really matter in the wound care space. There's a lot of differences between who can treat what type of wound and where on the body they could treat it. Over the last couple of years, we've seen a very, very, very large shift, and I'm sure you guys have all experienced this in your day-to-day, but we've seen a very large shift from private practice and even health system owned to private equity owned institutions. And you guys need to understand what really matters from a sales perspective as it relates to all of those different call points, whether that's a private practice, to a health system, or to private equity owned practices. At the very, very basic level of how to sell wound care, you have to be speaking to what matters to your provider.
Off chance that you are.
Can you guys all mute?
I think people have to mute their mics.
Yeah. Okay. And then we also, what is of paramount importance is understanding the differences between Medicare A, Medicare B, managed Medicare plans, and how that relates to almost 100% of these patients that you guys are going to be exposed to. All right. So first and foremost, this is kind of where it gets tough. I wish we were all in a classroom together so I could see hands go up. But if you have not read your IFU for Amnio Armor and ReviShield Plus, you need to do that. You need to understand that. You need to be able to recite that to not only your customers, but in the event that a materials management or somebody from HR asks you about them, right? You need to understand your IFUs front, back, and sideways. You need to understand what are contraindications, right? I mean, our contraindications of the wound care space are exposed tendon, exposed bone, active infection, right? But what other contraindications may apply to your patient, right? You got to be thinking those different ways as a consultative representative to your customer. We're following a very basic CMS program here, and that program reads that advanced treatment modalities like skin substitutes can be used for chronic and non-chronic pressure ulcers, venous insufficiency ulcers, diabetic ulcers anywhere on the body, oncological skin lesions. There's some grafts out there that have applications for use for for up to 2nd-degree burns in a clinical setting. And then what are our applicable places of service? And place of service is something that I think, as we onboard new reps through my organization, place of service is something that is very often confused and misunderstood, because as med device reps selling into the operating room, you don't have to think about it, right? But as it relates to advanced treatment modalities for chronic non-healing wounds, we can operate in 3 spaces. Place of service 11, which is your private practice or your physician's office. Place of service 12, which is your patient's home. And place of service 32, which is a long-term care facility. This does not apply to short-term nursing or SNFs. So these are LTACs only, physician office only, and patient home. Okay, there are some other places of service that you guys can do business with, and you guys have other surgical products that you might be able to sell into, called place of service 22, which is a hospital-based hyperbaric treatment center, right? So in that setting, the reimbursement conversation goes out the window, but you can still capture that business through selling your surgical product. But understanding this slide, it will give you the foundational requirements of having this conversation with any customer. I'm just going to pause for a second. Does anybody have any questions on this? Okay. So let's get right into it. Let's talk about MACs. Let's talk about podiatrists versus NPs versus MDs. In general, we have to understand which MAC you're operating in, right? I mean, down here in Texas, we're in Novitas. It's fantastic. It's very easy to do business within Novitas. But like Tim mentioned, Noridian, right? Out on the West Coast, a little bit north central United States. It's very, very difficult to do business in those. So understanding where you're at, like I know I heard somebody say Florida, right? So First Coast, right? You guys have the First Coast MAC. It operates very similarly to Novitas. But understanding your MAC, understanding what your providers are allowed to do within that MAC, and all that stuff is very, very important. Because if you don't understand that and you mislead your customer here, what's going to end up happening is one of 2 things. It's not going to end up getting paid for, right? And that's going to be a big problem of Revigen. Or it's going to get overlooked, get paid for, and then down the road, your customer is going to face a clawback. And those clawbacks can be to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So understanding MACs and your actual practitioner is very, very important. So for example, Nebraska, if we look at Nebraska, central US, a nurse practitioner and a physician assistant can operate independently of a doctor, meaning they can prescribe skin substitutes, they can administer the skin substitutes, and they can bill and collect the reimbursement related to those skin substitutes, right? Now, if you look at down here in Novitas in South Texas, you have to have a medical director, right? You have to have an MD or a DO overseeing all the services performed by your practitioner, right? The nurse practitioners down here can apply skin substitutes anywhere on the body. Physician assistants, again, can place skin substitutes anywhere on the body, so long as they're overseen by a medical director. Where things get kind of weird is in the podiatry space, because that first venous leg ulcer I showed you on that 3rd slide all the way to the left, right? That's a 288 square centimeter wound being treated by a podiatrist. In different portions of the country, podiatry can treat up to the ankle. Some could treat up to the knee. Some could treat up to the hip. It just depends on which state and which MAC you're dealing with, right? So understanding all of that is vitally important for the business arm of things, right? To ensure that your customer isn't facing a clawback. Oh. MAC. Yeah, so a MAC stands for Medicare Administrative Contractor, okay? So you can kind of look at it like Medicare as a whole, right? Works in DC, just like every other politician in the country. They never leave DC and they're in that swamp. They don't do anything for anybody. MACs are where Medicare funds MACs, which are then responsible for oversight of all of these submissions. They're responsible for ensuring that Medicare policy is being met by all of your physicians, right? What I mean by that is they're making sure that we're actually only applying these on chronic non-healing wounds, right? So the MAC is going to receive your patient's information from your customer for reimbursement, right? And they're going to evaluate length of time that the wound's been open, type of wound, right? Whether it's a chronic non-healing diabetic ulcer, or if it's just a pressure ulcer that occurred from, the patient being bedridden or something like that, right? So the MAC is the person that's actually processing your claims. In general, as it relates to who can treat what where, we have to look at the generalities from CMS. So in general, if we're talking about a grade 1 or a grade 2 ulcer, it's going to almost always meet criteria so long as that patient's Medicare funded. As we advance into more severe ulcers, into more severe deep wounds, grade 3 and grade 4 may not meet criteria. In some situations, it does. It really goes back to how your doctor is explaining medical necessity within his chart note, right? So everything that you guys do as the sales representative has to be supported by your physician in their chart notes, in their dictation, and everything has to match. So before we leave the slide, I need everyone to write this down. Pre and post debridement measurements are a requirement. If you do not see pre and post debridement wound measurements, you should not be allowing a graft to be shipped to your provider. In addition to those pre and post debridement wound measurements, and I'm not sure, Tim, you might be able to answer this or not, but some companies include a little disposable ruler in there that allows for the patient's information to be written on there along with the dimensions of the wound. In my group, every single one of our customers does this the exact same way. They take a picture with the pre-debridement wound measurements with that ruler. They take a post-debridement wound measurement with that post-debridement wound measurement and picture post-debridement. And all of that stuff is then transferred into the patient's file. Why we do that is to protect your customer in the event of issues in the future, right? So by having those photographs, by having those wound measurements, you're almost requiring Medicare pay for that patient because you're proving that medical necessity actually exists here, right? So pre-debridement, post-debridement, measurements, and pictures, it's a must. Every single one of your customers through Revigen should have, should be required to retain that information. Any questions on this slide? All right, so let's talk about differences in your audience, because when I got into wound care, right, I mean, my understanding of medical sales was I need to get the doctor's commitment, then I need to talk with Karen at materials management or at the OR to get approval, right? That's just the standard med device thing. As it relates to wound care, it could be the same exact conversation, right? If you're dealing with a hospital-based wound care center, could be the same conversation. Sure, you get the doctor's buy-in, then you got to go talk with Karen at materials management. Sure. But as it relates to private practice and private equity, it's a very different talk track. So, right, private practice, you're going to have plenty of guys that are like, hey, I don't give a damn about reimbursement. As long as the graft works, as long as I'm seeing the results, fantastic. That's what I want, because the graft right now that I'm using sucks. It takes 10 applications to heal, right? Versus a private equity conversation that's like, hey, how do we turn and burn as many patients as we possibly can and get the most bang for our buck from these grafts, right? So private equity does not care about clinical results. They care about the best margins. They care about being, most profitable. Whereas a private practice group, they may have a very strong inclination to discuss reimbursement, but at the core of what they're doing, it still may be clinical. Got to be a chameleon. And you have to be able to have these different conversations at every point of contact. And what I mean by that is it is often overlooked by our reps where, they think they appropriately targeted and identified a customer, and then, they might get customer facing, or they bring in, one of me or my sales directors. And it turns out that, even though the doctor described it as being the decision maker, et cetera, private equity actually owns the organization and they're still the decision maker, right? So being able to pivot from a clinical conversation to a very high level business conversation is vitally important, regardless if you're walking into a single man mom and pop podiatry shop, or if you're walking into the busiest wound care center in the town that you're in. Times have changed, okay? And this is something that I think, it evolves daily. Like Tim and Mike mentioned early on, there's a million companies out there doing this. I'll tell you guys, the way that Tim, Albert, and your team has set up your program, it is excellent. It is excellent. I've had the pleasure of dealing with quite a few different organizations in this space, and what you guys have put together is phenomenal. But because of so many different graft options being out there, wound care providers have had a perspective shift. If you look 10, 15 years ago, the standard of care for chronic non-healing wounds was patient's going to get taken back for a wound vac, right? A global fee thing. The hospital's losing money because they can't control infection. They can't control wounds. So they go ahead, apply a wound vac for 6 to 8 weeks, come back later on, and then they're doing some kind of large flap procedure. And the vast majority of those cases were done using autograft material, right? Never had allografts were still kind of a foreign concept 10 to 15 years ago as it relates to wound care, right? I mean, amnion's been used in the wound care space since 1908, first used to treat an ocular injury. So it's been around forever, but it's really been in the last 10, 15 years where surgeons have started shifting their mindset and wound care providers have started shifting their mindset of, hey, maybe I'm not going to send that patient back to the surgeon. I think I can handle this more in-house now because there are allograft options that have completely advanced, right? So often the questions you're going to get from a guy or a group that might not do a lot of this is, hey, at what point do I take a patient back to surgery? At what point do I say, hey, this product, this graft is no longer a feasible option for my patient? And more times than not, the option is not surgery. In the vast majority of chronic non-healing wound cases, we can treat these very, very effectively within the 10-week duration that we're given from Medicare, and we can get these closed. So that's something that as device reps, your wheels got to spin a little bit because you got to take the talk track away from surgery and keep this stuff in your clinic. The grafts work that well, and your graft works that well. I know where it's made. I know how it's made. It is an absolutely phenomenal graft. You guys, I would be very, very shocked if it took more than 7 to 8 applications with AmnioArmor or with Revashield Plus to close a wound. So you have these advanced treatment options to keep the patient out of the operating room. The last thing that I need to really drive home with you guys is relationships really matter in this space. And it doesn't mean you have to have the relationship today, but forming the relationship is so vitally important because your physician, your office manager, your billers, your AR contact, everyone from your customer's facility, they're going to be looking at you to not only, make them money through the use of this graft, right? But they're going to look at you and you need to serve them as a consultant. And that means being able to talk to the different types of wounds that you guys may be seeing and being able to suggest, and you really have to leave the ego alone here. And you have to be able to assess to your customer whether or not one option is better than the next. And I mean that for your graft versus stuff like TheraSkin, right? TheraSkin's a very low reimbursable product. It's really indicated for very deep wounds, but it's a fantastic product. So in many, many scenarios, right? I can think of a few hundred times just off the top of my head where we've suggested, hey, what we have is not the best option here. AmnioArmor, Revashield, they might not be the best option here. But again, by shifting that focus away from, hey, I'm going to make the most money here, I'm going to drive the crap out of the usage of my product, to, hey, let's make sure that your patients are taken care of and we're providing the best course of treatment for that patient. That's what I mean when I talk about forming those relationships. Anyone have questions on this one? I'm busting through this pretty quick because I really want this to, I want to get to the kind of end of it and just have this be an open dialogue. But seriously, if you guys have any questions, please interrupt me. So let's talk private practice versus health system or private equity. What changes? So probably the number one thing that changes is the risk aversion. Okay, so how aggressive your customer wants to be versus how conservative your customer wants to be. Private practice guy, and you're gonna run into this. I'd say probably 90% of the time. Private practice guys have either been burned or one of their other buddies has been burned. And what I mean by that is, our IVR team approves way more patients than they actually should. Provider doesn't end up getting paid, right? They don't end up getting reimbursement for it at the time of submission, or 2 years down the road, they come back and, hey, this patient never met medical criteria, right? So that is going to have a very, very bad impact on a private practice, where private equity that is throwing as much cash at these types of initiatives as they possibly can to get as many patients to get as many grafts applied to their patients as possible, right? To boost that revenue. when you are having that conversation, right? Private practice versus a health system or private equity, the conversations can be very different, right? Private practice, your conversation is going to be, okay, hey, we've got fantastic clinical results. We're going to get we're going to get your patient's wounds. We're going to make them gone within 8 to 10 applications. And we're going to make you a hell of a lot of money on it. We got your back, right? We have an IBR team that's excellent at what they do. We've got your back, but our clinical results drive that reimbursement. Whereas private equity, you have to come at them with, hey, leave the clinical stuff at the door, present to them what they need to see, whether that is inventory availability, back order resistance, if it's just straight numbers, but being able to have that, you got to shift the conversation, right? So if you're talking to a health system wound care facility, or if you're talking to a private equity backed large podiatry practice, it is going to be much more, it's going to be a much more drawn out process, right? Whereas private practice, you can walk into a guy today, have him sign your onboarding documents. He might have a patient today and you can have an order tomorrow. A health system wound care facility and private equity backed institutions are going to take a much, much longer sales process. So with where you guys are at, the majority of your time initially should be spent on engaging as many private practice physicians as you can. You're going to get the best bang for your buck, right? I mean, everyone's got vested interest in this. You guys are going to be spending money on dinners. You're going to be spending money on lunches, etc. Right? So getting the quickest return, getting the quickest platform, the quickest avenue to initial orders is so important with where you guys are at as an organization. But there are many of those health system wound care facilities and private equity backed institutions that, again, at your 1850 price point, are going to look at this very, very differently. So what I would suggest you guys start doing now is identifying those large groups that are going to take the time to really get done, and give yourself 6 months minimum to get any of those large projects done. But today, tomorrow, Monday, get out there, boots on the ground. You need to be hitting the single man, mom and pop podiatrists that are going to be a little bit more inclined to do business with somebody they trust, and you're going to have to perform that trust very quickly versus something that's going to take 6 to 9 months to develop. Closing business in wound care is fun. It's and I really mean that. Like it's amazing. The high you get when you receive your first like commission check from this stuff is unbelievable, because it's a very different monetary gain for everybody involved, right? But this is a very different close. This is a very different sale than dealing with a new doctor at an ASC or a hospital that Revigen has been doing business in for 10 years, right? It's going to be very easy. You don't have to deal with approvals. You don't have to deal with the explanation to the VAC committee. You don't have to, there's a million boxes that you don't have to check off in that scenario, right? In wound care, it is a whole different mindset. They are surgeons, wound care providers, practices, they're accustomed to the reps coming in there and banging for every single order. That is not the proper way to go about selling these products. You have to build that trust. You have to build that consultative relationship with your physician day one. So it's very easy. It's very, very easy. You're going to have a lot, and we're going to get into rebuttals in a slide here. And every single rebuttal I have on there has been something that I've heard a million times. But in building that initial trust, building that initial relationship with the doctor, there is absolutely no reason not to ask your doctor for the first 1-3 handful of patients to see the entire process through, what your IBR process looks like, what your ordering process looks like, how the graft works, how the reimbursement pans out, right? Just ask them to see a couple patients through that entire process. If it sucks, if they have a bad experience, never use me again, right? And then it falls back on you and the Revigen team to make sure that you guys are meeting and exceeding those expectations. Okay, but start small. Ask for one, ask for a couple. You guys got to stand by the clinical results that your product has. And, Tim, Albert, and his entire crew, they've invested a lot of money and a lot of time into developing the product, and it's a great product. With every single person you speak to in the wound care space, and I mean, I think this kind of resonates through surgical as well, but there's a pain point. There is absolutely a pain point that every single one of these guys have. And it's the quicker you can figure that question out, the quicker you're going to get the business, the quicker this is going to get closed. For many guys in this space, it's going to be, look, I've gotten screwed over for tens of thousands of dollars because a patient was approved that shouldn't have been approved. Medicare came back 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, clawed all that money back. How do I know this is going to be any different with your product, right? To Tim's point about how he has the rebate agreement set up, this is the way that it's structured is something that I have not seen in this space before, and I love it. I mean, I think it's a very good idea. I think it keeps everybody safe. So being able to walk your customer through that, right? Just like Tim did with all of us on the call this morning, you have to be able to walk them through that. If that's not the pain point, it might be like, hey, look, man, I've tried 5 different grafts. They don't do anything. I'm wasting a bunch of money. Putting my patient through weekly, debridements, and nothing's happening, right? So then that pain point goes back to clinical results. But in the wound care space, this is not like you're going to hound the guy, you're going to be super persistent, and you're going to get the business done. That's not going to work. You just going back is not going to work. You have to customize each one of these sales pitches to exactly what that pain point is of your customer, and then bring that entire scenario back to how you guys are going to make them feel a little bit more secure. And the number one mistake that we see, and I've got, we're up to like 63 or 64 reps across the country. The number one mistake that I see is reps thinking there's a next step, right? Because in med device and surgical sales, there is a next step. It's go talk to Jenny, go talk to Karen. We got to get the CFO approval. Then we got to get an award out to you. And then the legal's got to sign off on it, right? With wound care, especially in the private practice setting, it's as simple as, hey, get that agreement signed, identify that patient, ensure that medical necessities hit, and you're good to go. But you have to ask for the business. Far too many of our reps think there's a next step, think they have to talk to somebody else, think they have to, coordinate with an MA or somebody else about shipping rules, etc. Just ask for the business. I mean, it's ask for that one patient, ask for those 3 patients. And more times than not, if you present your product and your program properly, they're going to give you that opportunity. And 1 in 3 patients every single day of the week turns into 10 over the next 3 to 6 months, right? So start small, ask for the business, focus on the pain point, and you will succeed in this space. All right, so I'm not going to read all these. I'm going to let you guys take a second. And again, I don't know how many people on this call have experience in the wound care space or not. But these objections are literally written as we've received them. And I'm not kidding about the third one. I'm getting $10,000 per square centimeter from John Doe Manufacturing. I've had that conversation with the guy. There's not it's very, very clear. There's no product on the market that reimburses at $10,000 per square centimeter. But again, it went back to, hey, this is how much money I'm making from Smith & Nephew. How much money are you going to make me? And why can't you give me better margins? Your graft is the same as everybody else. The graft we currently have available sucks. You need to talk to private equity to get it done. I only use products on the ASP file. I've been burned for X dollars, so and so. So how do we handle all of that? And I want to kind of turn this over, and I want to get some engagement at this point. So I'm going to go back to this slide. How would you guys give me? Let's talk through. Let's talk through your graft is the same as everyone else. Let's just start real basic. How are we going to rebuttal that?
Customer service.
Customer service. Okay. What else? That's a great one.
Better reimbursement package.
Okay. Better reimbursement package. How about how do you know? What do you mean my graft's the same as everyone else's? You've never used my graft.
I typically go for, we are a distributor, not a manufacturer. Nobody knows anything is better.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, and I think this is where, everybody's got to see the entire process through. You got to see the graft work. My team, we've got statistics that we can use and throw out, right? I mean, my average wound closes in 6.5 applications with the graft that we sell. So, as you guys develop, more data, as you guys get more cases completed, you're able to speak to those statistics, right? I mean, I'm not speaking for the manufacturer that I represent, but I'm speaking on behalf of my customer base and what we're seeing in our customer base, right? So, clinical results, again, hey, I think, something that I'm going to suggest to Tim is getting some case studies built up immediately, and using some of those resources. Let's talk about the margins, okay? From a regulatory and compliance perspective, this is a very, very important one that I wanted to hit on. Why can't you give Dr. John Doe a 46% discount or a 52% discount? Does anyone know that answer?
Isn't that regulated by Medicare, what we can reimburse and what we can't?
Correct. Yeah. So again, this is a Medicare-driven program. Managed Medicare plans from all the big commercial guys, they cover a bunch of these graphs too. But at the end of the day, this is a Medicare federally controlled program. So there are the Stark laws, the Sunshine Act, anti-kickback, anti-inducement statutes that really regulate what we can and cannot say in the wound care space. If you do not know an answer, you are not dumb, you are not unprepared, you are not nothing. You need to get in contact with someone from Revigen to get you the answer. Do not shoot from your hip with this, right? Everyone on this call can bullshit with the best of them in the operating room, right? When it comes to wound care, this is a no bullshit space. You guys cannot speak on something unless you're 100% confident behind it. Because if you do, and it's illegal to say what you say, and this happens every single day, not only are you at jeopardy of going to prison, but Revigen's at a major, major, major risk of a federal lawsuit. Okay, so if you don't know, call Tim, call Albert, call Mike, call the guys from your team to get the answer. I think. No, I only use product on the ASP file. Does everyone on this call understand what the ASP file is? Does anyone not understand what it is? Tim, have you spoken to this at all? No? All right, so
What an ASP file is.
No, I haven't. You can tell them the differences.
okay. So this is an objection that you guys you will come across this. It's something that we have to deal with as well. So ASP file is a quarterly published file by the Center for Medicare Services. And like Tim said, to start this call, once your product hits the ASP file, it is on its way down to a very low reimbursement. But the ASP file is something that's published every single quarter. It's updated every single quarter with the new reimbursements, etc. You will run into customers that feel there is less risk associated with using a product on the ASP file compared to using a product off of the ASP file. I'm going to talk, this is on another slide coming up, but at the end of the day, everything that we're talking about is controlled under section 361, right? This is all minimally manipulated tissue. So I have not seen there's not been any difference in my experience between an ASP listed product and a product listed on a fee schedule. Okay. So addressing that, I mean, it's very simple. It's, hey, look, every single company in this space operates the exact same way. We all have to report our sales to Medicare the exact same way. Medicare is still ultimately what has allowed us to publish this reimbursement and for you to receive this reimbursement, right? So kind of just taking it away from the fact that it's on this pretty file that gets published once a quarter, back to the idea that, hey, while our graph is different, what we're doing is all pretty much identical to everybody else in the space. We follow the same requirements. We do the same thing as far as reporting goes, etc. All right, we got 2 left. I'm going to turn it over to questions, have a conversation with you guys. So what matters? Clinical results versus revenue inclined decision makers, right? So if your doctor or if your decision maker is a physician focused on clinicals, don't talk reimbursement. There have been many, many conversations where we've never even brought up reimbursement. Like we get our first order from the doctor and then the biller gets in contact with us a week later and is like, hey, what am I supposed to bill this thing out for, right? So identify who your decision maker is and then tailor that talk track to them. Private practice versus private money. I think I've hit on that plenty during this call, right? Private money is going to have a little bit more, they're going to be a little bit more risk averse. They're going to want to do it. They're going to, private equity shoots from the hip and they shoot big. Sometimes they hit big, sometimes they miss big, but they're willing to take that risk. Whereas private practice that's been burned, has very minimal cash flow, right? They might be much, much more conservative with who they're going to give this a shot on, and et cetera. Amnion's been around forever. Amnion's been used since, again, 1908. It's been used in everything from wound care to ocular surgery to general, colorectal, orthopedic surgery. It's used everywhere, right? We've got the data. We know that amnion works. You guys have a dual layer 100% amnion product, which means you have the type 2 antigens removed from your graft. So you have a product that is a do no harm product to your patient. It can only help, and it can only help your providers. Simplify your customers' lives. Okay, this comes back to the customer service comment that I think Caleb brought up. In any way that you can minimize the additional work, the additional stressors associated with these types of programs to the practice, right? Because many private practices are very understaffed. And so anything that you could do to kind of eliminate extra steps for them, help simplify and streamline your program, help position you in a very different light when it comes to selling against companies like MiMedx, Smith & Nephew, and Organogenesis. I will always, anyone that I speak to will state that clinical results will drive 100% of your business. Okay, because I don't care if your doctor's making $1,000 net profit per square centimeter, or if they're making $100 net profit per square centimeter. If your results suck, they're never going to use you again. Your reimbursement could be great, but at the end of the day, if you're not getting that patient who's an ever revolving patient in their practice out of their care, then they're going to look at you just like they look at Smith & Nephew, MiMedx, and Organo with these grafts that do not work. Okay, so what we do in my group, and I know Tim's got some plans and some ideas in his head of how Revigen's going to do this as well, but being able to provide to your customer almost everything that they may need in the wound care space will only bolster your position within the practice, right? The more that you can bring them, whether that's antimicrobial gel, whether that's silver-based dressings, whether that's other types of grafts, etc., anything that you can bring to the provider that's going to assist with the entire treatment, the overall treatment of your patient, is going to bolster your position with them and keep your competitors out. All right, so my final thoughts on this are, we're not reinventing the wheel, right? All of our grafts, every graft out there is, not every graft, but 99.5% of the grafts out there are all controlled and regulated under Section 361, which means they're all minimally manipulated tissue. My first boss in medical sales ever taught me this. And I think it reigns true with every single one of my reps to this day. Every sales call that you make, every email that you send, every phone call and text message that you send, you should be on a fact-finding mission. There's no piece of information that's too small. There's no piece of information that's too big, right? But what I mean by that is, let's identify those pain points that matter to our doctor. Let's identify those pain points that matter to our administrator, right? So if you could pull one piece of new information out of every single sales call, every single text message, every single email, right, you're going to close that gap between, or as it relates to your overall sales cycle, right? Use your resources early and often. Tim, his entire team, they're fantastic guys. Again, there are no questions in this space are too small. I think you guys should be blowing up Tim, Albert, and Mike. Sorry, guys. I know you're all busy, but you need to blow those guys up with any questions that you got related to the regulatory and compliance arm of this thing, okay? There are so many nuances that you're going to find, that you're going to learn through your day-to-day interactions with all these customers that you've never heard of before, you've never been asked about before, but you're going to need to be able to speak to. Okay, so the age-old saying in sales, crap, I just lost my train of thought. Sorry, I got a text message. You have to provide some kind of additional value to your provider. You have to be able to answer and speak to all these Medicare policies in very much detail, right? So again, you need to be serving all of your providers as a consultant, right? That's how we secure and retain all the business that we do, because our doctors text us, whether they think we have a product or not for their patient, we're the first line of contact, because they know that, hey, if they need an antimicrobial thing, I'm the guy. If they need a dressing, I'm the guy. If they need a graft, I'm the guy, right? They don't have to call anybody else, right? So you have to bring a consultative sales approach to every single one of your customers. You are not a sales representative trying to ram this product down everyone's throat and capture 100% of the business, right? You're a consultant. You want to start slowly picking off those cases one by one, two by two at a time. And you guys will be very successful in this space. So I rambled for freaking forever, which I hate doing. So I'm going to turn it over to everybody else on the call at this point. Let's talk. What questions you guys have, comments, etc.
I have a question. Which call points have you had the most success with? And I know we're talking about RoboShield Plus, and this is just this is new to me. I'm assuming everybody. How does it compare with Amnio Armor? Is it just more the reimbursement structure that we're bringing to the table here, or is there some other clinical benefits to the product?
Yeah, so I'll answer question one, and then I'll turn it over to Tim to answer the second part of your question. Lowest hanging fruit is podiatry.
Okay.
Podiatrists they see these every single day. Every podiatrist across the country has seen a diabetic foot ulcer. And that's the vast majority of chronic non-healing wounds, right? So podiatry, 100% your lowest hanging fruit. From there, I mean, obviously wound care facilities, right? Any kind of wound care center. The problem with wound care facilities they tend to take a lot more time. So
right,
quickest bang for your buck, podiatry, dermatology, plastic surgery. And Tim, I'll let you answer the question between Amnio Armor and RoboShield.
in relation to plastic surgery, have you had a lot of success with the guys that, because I mean, a lot of the plastic guys have their own private practice, so they're not necessarily performing these procedures in hospital or whatever the case is. And
so
a lot of these people are probably, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so when I'm referring to plastic surgery, I'm talking strictly medical plastic surgery, reconstructive
Not cosmetic.
surgery, not cosmetic at all.
Okay.
But to your point, there are many, many, many private practice reconstructive plastic surgeons still in the space. I mean, I think they're one of the few specialties that's kind of escaped being bought out by all the health systems and stuff. So we still see a very, very high percentage of reconstructive plastic surgeons that are private.
Thank you.
Who was there something else I needed to answer, Jerry?
Yeah, product difference between Amnio Armor and RoboShield Plus. I wanted to know if it's just reimbursement or if there's been anything different with the actual development of the product.
The only feedback that we've had corporately, because we just started using the new graft, is we've had most surgeons that have used the Amnio Armor for the last 2 years, and they've tried the new graft and they feel like the new graft works a little better, a little quicker. If I was to tell you why, I could not. They are manufactured in different plants. So I don't know the answer why, but we've had that feedback from 2 now that they like the new graft better. But they both work extremely well. So I think to Jerry's point, you need to sell clinically and have them try both grafts and let them decide, So there's going to be guys that are not going to be comfortable at 1850 a square centimeter, and they're going to want a lower price graft just because they're not comfortable with making that kind of a margin on these products. So then you have to sell them Amnio Armor. So it's good to have both.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a great point. There's going to be plenty of guys out there that will be scared by the reimbursement. You know, you guys have one of the market leading reimbursements for product. So yeah, I mean, having amnio armor is a huge, huge benefit to having kind of in your back pocket.
So Gerald, how would you address that if you're talking to a doctor and he seems a little uncomfortable about the reimbursement? So then you bring up the fact that you have amnio armor, but now he's kind of questioning, well, what would be the difference between? Sorry about that. Now he's questioning, well, what's the difference between these two grafts, and you know, the
Yeah,
conversation
so
goes that way.
yeah, not very good question. So we've got the company we represent. We have two graphs that are pretty much identical. So we have this conversation pretty frequently. And it's kind of it's the same conversation that we're having related to Revashield and amnio armor. So you can say it literally just like you did, Doc. Like, you know, it's pretty much the same product. It is manufactured in a different facility. We're seeing a little bit better results with Revashield Plus currently. But amnio armor, you know, we've had on the market for a couple of years now. We've seen fantastic clinical results, and it's also on the ASP file. So, you know, there's nothing wrong with saying, right? Again, at the end of the day, this is minimally manipulated tissue. There's only so much that we can change for a product without it having to go through a de novo classification as a 510K device, right? So there's only so much that every single company in the space can do as it relates to changing products. So there's nothing wrong with you having that conversation. Hey, it's pretty similar. You know, it is manufactured in a different facility. We are seeing a little bit better results with Revashield Plus. We're kind of studying that. We're looking into that as to why right now. But really the biggest difference, Doc, is one is on the ASP file at 6, whatever it was, and then one's, you know, not on the ASP file yet, but it reimburses at 1850. So it's kind of whatever you're most comfortable with, Doc.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
What's amnio armor reimbursing at now? Because it was like 950, I think, at one point.
It's 637 now.
637. Okay.
Yep.
Which I'll say, you know, that's really, it's still a very nice price point. Like currently, that's still a very good price point. I mean, that's low enough to make most of the guys that are scared of big stuff more comfortable, but it's still high enough that they're gonna make a profit. And something I just want to go back to that Tim was talking on in the very beginning, right? When you're looking at your different rebate options, the 30%, the 40%, it's small. It's a small margin, but even at a 30% discount, right? Even if the patient's single insured Medicare only, they're going to still make a 10% margin there. So I think that's important. You got your doctors might not make a ton of money if they're on a 30% rebate agreement and the patient only has a primary. You know, but a 10% margin on an 1850 per square graft, that's still good money.
Thank you.
Something else I wrote down that I wanted to bring up to you guys. So what we see as far as payments go, right, reimbursement to customers, what we're seeing is any wound between 1 square centimeter and 50 square centimeters, we're seeing that paid out to the customer by the 10th business day. So sometime within those 10 business days following the date of billing is when we're seeing those reimbursements hit. And then anything 50 square centimeters or more, we're seeing can take up to about 28 business days. So in both scenarios, right, by allowing your customer net 60-day payment terms, you could be very, very confident that they're going to receive that reimbursement far before that time comes up. What else? What else?
So a lot of the literature I've found has been directed at amnion and chorion. What would you say the advantages are of a dual amnion graft?
Great question. Great question. Historically, amnion chorion products that's kind of the only thing that's been around until, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I'd say. So the biggest thing with any kind of chorion containing product is that it retains the type 2 antigens from mom, right? So there's no way for any company out there to remove 100% of the genetic material from the donor, right? So if you look at placenta, right, that's what everything's derived from. Chorion is the outermost layer. It actually acts as an anti-parasitic for the mom, so the baby doesn't kill mom. I mean, that's really chorion's role, right? So by removing chorion, and you guys have a dual layer 100% amniotic product, you're pretty much completely eliminating any type of adverse event that could occur to your patient. So what companies see nationally, and my medics has many adverse events reported against their amnion chorion products, but what you see nationally is amnion chorion products they've kind of become obsolete because of these factors, right? So there's adverse events against mimetics, against organogenesis that show rejection related to amnion chorion products, actually show infection related to amnion chorion products. So when you have 100% amnion product, we're taking out all the bad stuff, only giving the patient the building blocks of cellular tissue, right? I mean, we can't describe amnion as an MSC. We cannot describe it as a stem cell in any way, shape, or form. But at the core basic principle of what amnion and amniotic fluid is, right? It's designed to grow a baby, right? So the foundational building blocks of life without any of those antigens, right? So the benefit is you're getting twice as much amnion as you would from an amnion chorion alternative. You can't say you're eliminating, but you're very strongly reducing any type of adverse event that could occur from your product. And in general, man, I mean, these things, amnion products, they resorb quicker, they work faster, they have an antimicrobial, antibacterial property just naturally occurring within the amnion. So there's a ton of benefits to get your customer off of an amnion chorion alternative over to a dual layer 100% amnion product.
Thank you.
Yep. What else? No too small questions, guys. Seriously, it's not too small of a question here. All right, well, I'm going to put my cell phone in the chat. Do not call me and ask me what company I work with. Do not call me asking for tips and tricks about competitive landscape. But if you guys have any questions as far as tailoring your talk track, identifying different targets, working through, some confusing proposals or confusing conversations, anything that you guys need, I'm a resource to you. Seriously, I love Tim and Albert and everything that you guys are doing at Revigen. So if there's anything that I can help you guys with at any point in time, I just put my cell phone number in the chat. So if you text me, you will get a response. If you call me, I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I'm a little bit busy, so text is probably the easiest to get a hold of me. But seriously, anything that you guys need, let me know. If anyone after this call, thinks of a bunch of questions, write them down, give me a shout at some point, and we could talk through them all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jerry.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
We can call Greg too. I don't know what he's doing.